Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Tech Show. I'm your host, John Myer, and this week we're talking with public cloud leaders and experts from cost optimization to data visualization, including enterprise podcasters and even CTO advisors. Also, don't forget those Cloudtamers around their thoughts on multi-cloud solutions. Stick around because you're going to want to hear what they have to say on multi-cloud and is it really worth it? Are enterprise companies investing in multiple cloud solutions for fear of vendor lock? What about training or hiring jack of all trades? And in this case, jack of all clouds. And is multi-cloud more hassle than it's worth, or are there benefits of it? If you enjoyed the Daily Tech Show, don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and the notification. Also, comment down below on what you think. First, let's give the Google definition on multi-cloud. Multi-cloud is the use of multiple cloud computing and storage services in a single architecture. This also refers to the distribution of cloud assets, software, applications, etc. across several cloud hosting environments. Now, how about we hear from public cloud experts and leaders on their thoughts on multi-cloud? Kicking off our week-long series on multi-cloud and joining us from his current road trip is none other than the creator of CTO Advisor, Keith Townsend. Let's welcome Keith to the show. Keith, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, John.
Yeah, so Keith, I know you're currently on a road trip. How about we give a little bit of backstory about yourself and where you're currently at and your road trip?
So, IT management consultant or technology management consultant with 20 plus years of experience. Me and the wife are embarking on a road trip around the country, talking to folks about everything from everyday life to hybrid IT infrastructure and multi-cloud. We're currently I'm looking out the window, we're in Galveston, Texas, right? And if you're following the CTO Advisor road trip, we're in Houston.
So Keith, I am actually following it. I noticed that you do have your map now on your RV. And as many times as you have posted, you've hit a number of states here on the East Coast and you're starting to spread out.
Yeah, the states get a little bigger as we go west. You know, Texas is about as big as it gets. So the number of cities are winding down. California is the next big stop, then Seattle, and then Colorado, and then home. So we'll have to probably hit the road again next year to hit all of the Midwest.
Yeah, now this is just a 90-day road trip, correct?
This is just a 90-day road trip. So all 15 right. Cities in 90 days.
Wow. I'll tell you what, you guys are doing an awesome job out there. I love following you along, your posts on Twitter. I see everything on LinkedIn. Keep it up. You're doing an awesome job.
Thanks a lot, John.
All right. So, Keith, the reason you're on the show today is because you have a lot of experience, and obviously the role of CTO Advisor says so much about you. I want to hear your thoughts on what do you think multi-cloud means to you, and does it really exist successfully?
So I have a very unpopular opinion of multi-cloud. I believe if you have multiple cloud providers, at least from the purview that I see, which is the CTO responsible for all of the technologies inside of an enterprise, if you have multiple cloud service providers, whether they're SaaS or IaaS or PaaS, you have multi-cloud. That's my definition, which is pretty unpopular.
Interesting. So would you say that companies are implementing it correctly, and is it very successful, or what are you seeing out there?
So the answer to that question is yes. So the companies are implementing it. Are they implementing it successfully? Not so in so many cases, and so in some cases. So let's define the other definition of multi-cloud that's out there too, and whether or not if that's successful. The other definition of multi-cloud is where I take a application and I spread my data across multiple clouds, my workloads across multiple clouds. Let's say that it's SAP and I have ECC in one cloud, and then I have my data warehouse in another cloud, and I'm deploying that across multiple clouds. Have I seen that be successful? The answer to that question is definitely not. Don't do that. Don't do that. Then there's other extremes. There's less extremes where I have VMware vSphere, and I'm deploying VMware Cloud on AWS and Microsoft Azure VMware solution and I'm running my VMware landscape across multiple clouds, including my infrastructure. That's also successful. But the ideal of using the same application across multiple clouds, not so much.
All right. So you actually did the definition that I just read to everybody, which is the Google definition of multiple cloud providers. When I hear multiple cloud providers, I hear AWS and Azure. Now there's GCP and there's others out there. Are you seeing other, implementations tried across GCP and AWS, GCP and Azure? Or are you just seeing, when you say multiple cloud, I have my private cloud and AWS, which is traditionally out there utilizing both? What are you seeing out there?
So I'm seeing both. And there's a couple of different drivers. There's the technology driver, and then there's the political or licensing or cost driver. Let's say that I'm a big Oracle customer. Oracle a few years ago, with their combining their ELA for your database software, kind of forced you into buying some of their cloud services, and you have these cloud credits. And this happens in Azure too, but your primary cloud may be AWS. So you're trying to figure out how to use these cloud credits that you have in Oracle Cloud or Azure and use your primary cloud, which for most people is AWS. I see that cross-pollination all the time. Whether or not I'm actually using data across those two clouds or operationally, I have the connectivity between the on-prem systems, the public cloud, and the two public cloud providers. There's extremes in both directions.
Now, you mentioned and talked about a couple of things. One, the different services that are available that might be unique to my application or my company. But you also mentioned credits and, what is being basically given out there. Hey, we want you to come into our cloud. Here's some credits to utilize it. Does that also go in hand with the concern of vendor lock? Like vendor lock does exist, but doesn't really exist. I mean, come on, you're going towards one cloud, you're utilizing the services. So I guess my question for you is it really driven not only by credits, but also for fear of licensing or vendor lock?
So yes, the answer is kind of twofold. And this is an argument that I get into with CTOs, VP of infrastructures, etc. They do not like vendor lock at the level that you're looking at it because they've looked at storage, compute, networking, and they've diversified that within their data center, especially on the networking side. And a lot of this cloud spend ends up in either the network group or the server group. And they've been able to avoid lock-in from their lens, and they believe in it definitely. So when they look at public cloud service providers, they want that same desired portability, which honestly doesn't exist today as a realistic option. I absolutely do not recommend vendor diversity or vendor lock-in as a reason to go with multiple clouds. The driver for multiple clouds are very different than the driver for going to the public cloud itself.
I agree with you on that because the driver back then on going with a storage solution was obviously licensing and discount. And, I would say back in the day, you did have that vendor lock where you're utilizing a certain platform. But from what you said, and, I really like watching your show and following you along on how you really present a lot of the information to CTOs is that why are you using this service? Why are you going to this cloud? Why are you using this on-premise? Why are you using that? What are your driving factors? Licensing, yeah, that's a driving factor in some cases, but does it provide you a better, storage solution? Does it provide you a better cloud solution? Or are you looking for certain, benefits from one cloud provider to the next?
Exactly. Is it helping you do more with less, which is the driver of most of the folks who listen to shows like this? Enterprise IT is additive. I've had this argument when HCI first came onto the scene. I have not seen a large enterprise abandon their 3-tier storage in application and data center architecture to go all HCI. They add HCI to their extending set of portfolios. Now do they not only have their NetApp, Fowler, and their HCI system to manage, they also have public cloud on top of that. So the portfolio continues to grow. If you're going to add public cloud to your portfolio, it's because it's solving a problem that allows you to do things you cannot do in your private data center. That has value, and therefore lock-in is not as big of a concern because I'm doing something that I couldn't otherwise do without cloud.
Now, you said adding, public cloud to the portfolio. If I have multi-cloud, not only do I have to, what's your thoughts actually on, training? So I have somebody on premise. Now I got to train them for, say AWS. Now I have multiple cloud solution. Now I have Azure. If you're adding AWS and Azure to your portfolio, how does it affect your employees? Are you hiring more? Or are you trying to generalize an employee, somebody on premise to just both, cloud providers? How's that really affecting that?
Yeah, you again, something you don't necessarily want to do unless you have to do it. Let me give you a very practical example. We did a study comparing all the VMware cloud providers from the hyperscalers of the day. The one hyperscaler we excluded was Azure because their solution wasn't generally available yet. But you had AWS, Oracle Cloud, who sponsored the study, and then Google. All three were vSphere under the covers. When I went to go create a VM, the experience was the same across all three providers. It was vSphere. It was basically an application that ran in the public cloud. Where it became difficult and where I added friction for my engineers when I said, you know what, expose the VDI portal to the public internet. 3 different ways to do it in 3 different cloud providers and multiple ways of troubleshooting each one. So even when I take a single platform such as vSphere and paint over the public cloud, training became an issue even for my small team because they had to go back and learn how to do it for each public cloud. Now you have 3 SOPs for the same process across multiple cloud providers.
And, it's definitely a learning curve because just imagine a 3-tier architecture, right? And I want to deploy it out using, a template like Terraform. The syntax and everything is completely different from one developer or one engineer to the next. And now multitasking is not a thing. There are very few people who can multitask. So now you have to change your brain into, okay, how do I write this Terraform for AWS? How do I write it for Azure? Or troubleshoot it, or, kind of going in there and now I need a specific engineer for it. I don't think it's possible to have an expert in both clouds to the level that you need for an enterprise company.
Yeah, and this is a decision that CIOs, CTOs, and IT leaders have to make. How much value is there in having someone who really knows AWS or really knows Azure versus somebody who knows a little bit about each, and knowing that you still have to take your smartest people and dedicate them to some of the old legacy stuff? And this is where I'm seeing folks getting hung up at, is that I only have so many smartest people. Like my top 20% is only my top 20%, and I can only put them on so many problems. And is the problem that I want them to solve multi-cloud? I don't know.
I think if they invest in one cloud, they're going to get their applications either migrated or utilize one cloud faster than they will on a multiple cloud solution. Not only just trying to communicate between all 3 or even 4 clouds, depending on how they have it configured. But the other thing on top of that is think of the cost of the data transfer between each of those clouds. If you're passing a lot of data back and forth between them for your data lakes, for your SAP stuff, it's really going to drive your costs way up rather than isolate it within one cloud. Do you see that out there, like the cost between them?
Well, not just the cost, the complexity.
Oh yeah.
People think just because I can deploy a VPC with a couple of clicks of a button, have multiple paths to in and out of AWS, that networking all of a sudden becomes easier in the public cloud. It doesn't. It becomes more complex because you're accounting for egress charges. The path from EC2 in Virginia to Azure location in Ohio, is that closer than the EC2 instance that's in Ohio? So internetworking between multiple cloud providers and latency becomes super complex because this is not your network in the same sense of you're using AT&T, level 3, etc. in your private data center. Not the same networking paths, not the same level of complexity. It's much more complex and more difficult to manage on the balance.
Yeah, so that's something that I don't think a lot take into accountability when they're thinking about multi-cloud. Here's a question for you. When you go into an enterprise and they're talking about doing a multi-cloud solution, what kind of advice would you give to them? What would be like your elevator pitch of do or don't, and what are the pros and cons, and to really just drive that factor of is it worth it or not?
So if they've made the decision and there's no turning back from the decision, if I can't deter them to not do multi-cloud, then it's about focusing on the services you use and not necessarily application portability. I.e., if I'm going to build functions as a service, an application built on functions as a service, AWS Lambda, okay, that kind of makes sense. If I want AI as a service, TensorFlow and Google makes sense. If I want to simply lift and shift my VMware vSphere operations to the public cloud, then Oracle Cloud makes sense. If I want to consume VMware vSphere as a service, AWS VMC on AWS makes more sense. So now it's just, picking best of breeds and eliminating the complexity when it comes to data interoperability. It's fine if you want to use multiple cloud providers, but if you're talking about using the same data sets across multiple clouds, across multiple services, oh, wow. You know what? Our friends at NetApp have solutions for you. But operationally speaking, avoid it if possible, and embrace a service by service, best in service approach versus trying to make your data and services, redundant services, available across multiple clouds.
So Keith, your years of experience speak for itself, and some of the things and issues that you've seen with enterprise companies and CTOs. So my last question here for you before we round this out, have you seen customers go into obviously that multi-cloud, but what are some of those common mistakes that happen with multiple solutions that are not, kind of thought of upfront? Maybe you can give, they're already decided they're going to multiple cloud, but what are some of the common mistakes that they see? Or maybe you can talk them out of it. What do you see out there?
So data. I can't tell you how much people fail in this area of planning. Just because you're using a SaaS service doesn't mean you no longer have the concerns around data protection, data management, data sovereignty, data privacy. All of those concerns exist in SaaS as they do in PaaS and infrastructure as a service, and you have less control and insights. The knobs you can turn to administer and control SaaS data are different than the knobs you can turn to do that for IaaS data, but it's still the same types of data that have the same compliance issues. So this is not even talking about the data protection or data access. We're just talking about basic blocking and tackling, and you have to understand what your data policies are and how you're going to enforce and support those data policies across multiple providers, let alone allow multiple providers access to the data across multiple clouds. So get your data policy, get your data house in order first, and then you'll have clarity when it comes to designing multi-cloud data access and multi-cloud data services.
Pete, that's really some awesome advice there on around your data, because some of the things that I see or notice is they don't really take some of that into consideration. They'll just implement it and they'll be like, all right, man, now I need to lock this down that another cloud provider can only access X, Y, or Z. But I think it would be great. In an upcoming series that I'm working on is around data security, data cost, optimizing your data, but data governance as well. So you touched on a bunch of those. So I really appreciate you leading into maybe my next week or the following week series that I will be doing. And that was not planned, folks. Trust me, it was not. It's definitely a great topic. So Keith, before we end it, do you have anything you'd like to share with the audience? In general, it doesn't have to be multi-cloud, your road trip, whatever's on your mind.
You know what? We've spent a lot of time and resources revamping the website for folks to be able to find our research more often. We're throwing a lot of stuff into the CTO Advisor hybrid infrastructure, a data center purpose-built to simply tell the hybrid IT journey or this multi-cloud journey. To find those projects, go to thectoadvisor.com/projects, and you can see what we've done real life inside of a live running data center.
Keith, I checked out your website. I do like the Ford F-150. And the F-150, or is it 250 on there?
It's really nice. F-250. Yeah.
F-250. Really nice. I've got an F-150 myself, so that pops right out at me. I really liked your
America's favorite truck.
Yes, it is. Folks, this is not sponsored. We just love it. It's our opinion. But so, Keith, I really appreciate your time. Folks, before we end this, don't forget, this is a week-long series on multi-cloud. I have more public speakers, leaders, and experts join us. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe, and notification button. Keith, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I hope to see you on this again.
Thanks a lot, John. Anytime.
Yeah, all right. Hey, be safe out there. Have an excellent road trip, and I'll be sure to follow you along.